What's going on, everyone? It's Ryandrew. I'm back here again with another one of these brush inking demos of a Jack Kirby illustration of the Incredible Hulk. I really like this illustration of the Hulk. It's a really good example of the force perspective that Kirby would use a lot to show the strength and power of his characters. This is a good example of that force perspective. You can see there on his arm and his foot just basically jumping out of the image there. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll show you how I did this one. So I'm actually using, I think it's Nina brand. It's like a resume paper, a little bit thinner than cardstock. It goes to the printer a lot better. I just print the line art on this top face of the paper here. And this is like two-sided, two different shades on the back, and then on the front a little bit lighter finish. So I used the lighter finish and just like scaled back the opacity of the image and printed it. And I'm also using the trusted size 1 Winsor Newton Series 7 Sable brush, Kolinsky Sable brush. Very good for this size of image to ink with. Of course, I'm also using Speedball Super Black for these. It's a really stable ink. I mixed a little bit different inks in there, so it's a bit more opaque. And what I have here is a shot glass you can get from Walmart. Just put my ink in there, and then I can just carry that in my hand while I'm inking. Just dip in ink, dip in ink. And again, it's good practice to get the ink in your brush and then roll it off on the paper and taper the point of your brush before you actually start inking. So what you do is you dip in maybe halfway up the brush, up the hairs on the brush, and then you roll it off a little bit here, and then you can go onto the paper and then taper that point of your brush a little bit finer. So see, I'm getting some very fine lines here. If you get too much ink in there, you just kind of mush it out onto the paper and then roll it down until you get a nice fine line that's crisp enough for you to start inking. And also, I'm just using some painter's tape to tape the image down here on my artboard. You don't really want a very high tack. You want like a lower tack tape if you're going to do this. It just helps to keep it stable on the board. Here is an example of just warming up. I just like to do this sometimes to warm up with a different image. Get used to using the brush and getting some nice lines in there before you actually go to ink the final piece. So you can do that too. Bonus tip. And again, you always want to get the excess ink out of your brush before you start inking. You want to get a nice crisp point on the tip of the brush. So I'll taper that point down before I start. And it's always kind of a challenge to see where I'm going to start, but I always go left to right, and I'll start with the contour, the outside edge, as much as possible of the image. So really what you want to do is you want to make nice, distinct, bold lines when you're inking. Especially when I'm doing this contour inking stage, I want to make sure my lines are crisp, solid, determined, very, very clean as much as possible. I will do minimal shading and interior inking, but at this point it's more about going around the whole edge of the character first. Of course, here I do like to start with the face as soon as possible, because I feel like if you get the face wrong, you know, your drawing is going to be all the worse for it. So I like to start with the face and really try to focus on the eyes and everything, making sure that looks right. You can always go back in with, you know, like white ink or white out or something like that to correct your ink lines at the end, but I like to not do that. I like to just have it kind of be what it is for these, especially when I'm doing the demonstrations here. I will do the face, and I'll try to get all the details of the face off as soon as possible so that it looks pretty good, and I feel better about doing the rest of the image. And you'll notice too, I'll be rotating the paper around a lot, the image around. Apologies for that, and I know this is a demonstration video, but in reality, when you're inking, you want to make the best line as possible. So what that means is you don't really want to be inking with like the barrel of the brush. When you're trying to get a nice crisp line, you need to be inking with the point of the brush. So that means sometimes you've got to rotate that page around so that it'll give you the right angle to get that point right out in front of your line. Some people, they'll pull up with a brush, some people pull down. I'm still in the phase where I'm kind of like pulling down more than, you know, pushing up with it or something like that. So that's why I'm rotating the image as much as I can so that I can get the right angle for that crisp line from the point. And again, I really want to get a nice round line a lot of these edges, right? I'm doing the contour, and the line work is meant to lead the eye around the image. So I want to make sure that my lines are very continuous and very bold and direct, and they're not very scratchy. You know, that can be a style that people use when they ink. I really try to follow the inking style of the guys who inked Jack Kirby's work, and they were very much about like the bold, crisp, smooth lines. And I try to get as continuous of a line as I can when I ink. And I mentioned it a little bit, but this image is really great because it's a good example of Kirby's forced perspective, which is what he used a lot when he wanted to emphasize the strength or the power of his characters. The Hulk obviously is one of the strongest characters that Kirby created. So it's like, you know, he's really showing the strength and the power with Hulk just reaching, almost like reaching out of breaking the fourth wall, reaching right towards her face with that arm, and then his foot just kind of crashing through the page as well. And this really works. You can see if you were to like size up, you know, his 2 feet, you'd see that one of them is like 3-4 times the size of the other one, and the same thing with his arms. So that's a very good example of how he used this technique to sell that idea that the Hulk is just crashing out of the image, right? He's lunging at you. And at this stage too, I am kind of going into the inside of the image and breaking a little bit away from just doing the outside edge of the contour lines, but you can see that these lines, these fold lines in his skin, you know, I really want to nail those down before I start getting into the heavy shadow areas where I'm putting down a lot of black ink. Another distinctive thing about Kirby is that he really kind of spells out this way of showing the musculature or the shapes of the muscles in his characters with that really funky like shape language that he invented. Just the squiggles and the thick and thin elements there. And it's really fun to ink those. He really spells that out in his drawings. I think the other reason that I like to start out with the contour line first is really focusing on that nice detailed brush work with the point is, you know, once you've got that figured out and nailed down and you have the lines figured out, then it's just really easy to go into the areas where there just needs to be a lot of black ink applied and you can just fill those in really quickly. You know, if you're trying to do that as you go, sometimes you can mess those areas up. So I like to just make sure that I've got the contour line figured out and nailed down so that it looks good. And then I can kind of go into those areas of the black shadow and just not really even have to think about it. You can just jump in there and start throwing in ink. One thing I really appreciate about Kirby is that he's not afraid to throw in these areas of shadow where it's just kind of obscuring some of his image. And it might be intimidating for, you know, an artist like me or someone else who's just not used to doing that as much, but it's like once you get those very distinct, stark areas of black and white, you start to get some really cool contrast going on in the image. Like this shadow, right? This shading on his hands and his arm, not so much completely realistic, but the point point of this is to exaggerate and to draw attention to the strength of that arm reaching for you, right? That's where you're putting the focal point of the image, is right there in that arm. So the way he does it is kind of moves away from realism by just throwing in these really quirky areas of black where it's like not really following the form completely. It's just got its own logic going on here, but it just really works to make that an interesting thing to look at. You're focusing on the arm. That's the point of the image. You're focusing on his arm reaching towards you. And I think another thing that this image shows us by Kirby is that you don't really need to have a lot of things going on in your image when it comes to inking. Kirby's style was very direct, very simple. I wouldn't say simple, very simplified in certain ways where it was effective. He wasn't trying to over-render his pencils. He was very much concerned with putting the emphasis or the focal point where it needs to go, and then using some shading, some modeling here and there to show the form and to show that relationship of what's going on in the image. But he's not just, overdoing it with shadow and with feathering and with different lines going on. He's very concerned with a balance there so that you're not distracted. Sometimes if you have too much going on, you'll see, with modern inking, you've got so much going on in the inking that you can't really process what the image is right away. And that's important when you're looking at an image. You're trying to read the action of the character. So he was really good at just knowing where to put those lines, which ones are necessary, and what really communicates that strength and that motion of his characters as they're in motion. And of course, when you're doing a longer inking session, always make sure to wash your brush out and clean it out and make sure that the ink's not getting trapped up there in the brush. It'll just really help your brush stay good for a lot longer. So now what I'm doing here for the background is I started using a dip pen. I like to use different materials because it's going to force me to do this differently than I did with a brush. With a dip pen, I'm not trying to ink as boldly or get very different contrast of lines here. What I'm trying to do is kind of use a similar, or I guess like a monoline just for this, because the reason is I'm trying to push this into the background and I'm trying to let the line be very consistent so that it's like your eye kind of goes over it without really paying more attention to it than you do with the foreground of the image. So I'm just using kind of like a monoline contour for the different rock shapes back here. And then for the different areas of shadow and black, I'm just going to use some hatching techniques, some basic hatching techniques that are going to, I think, contrast better with the strong black shapes of the foreground of the Hulk. I want to say that this pen nib that I'm using is a Hunt, some kind of Hunt pen nib. It's one of the drawing ones that you'll get in the kits that you can buy at like Hobby Lobby or Michael's or something. Comes in the Speedball packages, with the different pen holders. These are one of the bigger drawing ones. These are steel. They're very good. They don't flex a lot, so you get a really consistent line out of these. And they're just very reliable. They don't jam or they don't like stick into the paper too much. They kind of glide over it pretty well. So this is a good option for this kind of inking that I'm using here for the background because I don't want it to be very distracting. I want it to be very consistent and just kind of sitting in the background as much as possible. I really wanted to work on this image because I like that he included a lot of rock shapes in the background. I'm really fascinated with rock shapes. It's like something that doesn't really come to you naturally to think of how to draw them, but when you look at them in nature, they're just such weird shapes going on with rocks and boulders. It just helps to go over and just practice on the different shapes that you can make with a boulder or with rock or anything like that. And now what I'm going to do is just go around this image and frame out the image with a panel border. There's like a panel border in the illustration, so I didn't want to leave it there, and it kind of cuts off some of the background rocks, so I just decided to go around and ink that as if this were a large splash panel on a page. What I'm going to use is, I think this is the Hunt B series of nibs, the ones that have like the little circle or dot at the end of it. And you would use these for panel borders. You can use them for lettering, different things. This is one of the medium sizes, I believe. It just gives you a nice consistent line, and I think this is what they would use when they would do the actual panel borders, or they would do like the lettering and things like that. It's pretty effective. The other thing that I've done here is I've taken my ruler and I've put like some felt furniture casters, little tiny furniture casters on the bottom of the ruler to give it a little bit of height, lift it off the board, the surface a little bit. The reason why is you don't want to ink with a ruler, and what's going to happen is when you ink like next to a ruler, when it's right on top of the paper, is it's going to bleed. The ink's going to bleed right under the ruler immediately, and it's going to smudge on top of your illustration, all that kind of stuff. So I decided to just lift the ruler up a little bit so that when I'm inking, it's not going to get trapped underneath there. It's going to be a nice crisp line. And the last part here is just doing the signature, inking Jack Kirby's signature, putting my name on here after Jack Kirby. So this is my tribute to him, trying to ink it in his style or in the style of his inkers at the time. So that's it, guys. There's the final illustration, the final inking of this image of the Incredible Hulk by Jack Kirby. Again, such a great example of Kirby's style with the strong, dark black shadows of ink mixed with that really cool line work, dynamic posing that he uses for his characters. You can see it here with his arm just in that extreme foreshadow perspective in the front there. Really grabs your attention right away and really sells the strength and the power of the Hulk in this image. This was really fun to work on. I'll probably ink some more in the future of the Hulk. There's another image that was really cool I showed you at the beginning that I warmed up with, and I'll probably do that one too as well. So just wanted to show you guys this one. I think it came out pretty well. There are certain things I would definitely want to change, but overall I had a lot of fun on this one. So thanks so much, guys, for watching this. I hope that you got something out of it. I hope that it was informative or encouraging for you to watch and just see how to approach inking something like this. I'm definitely no master, still learning, but I think that this is a good master artist to learn from, Jack Kirby. So I really enjoy doing these. I hope to put out some more of the Hulk maybe or other characters. But yeah, thanks for watching. But for sure, please like, share this with others. Consider subscribing to this channel for more content like this, comics and inking and things like that. And as always, until next time, thank you so much, and God bless, guys.